Nice Retina IIa. This one's been here before, 4.5 years ago. It's changed hands since I left here, and it's got a problem. When the current owner goes to use it, he was getting overlapping frames. Now that's not very easy to achieve with one of these cameras with things even vaguely working, because normally what happens is when you swing the film advance, this is driven. This is driven too, but it has a slipping clutch. This is not supposed to slip, but look at this. It'll slip in either direction. That's not normal, that's not natural. Something is seriously wrong with this camera. And so I'm interested to find out exactly what. So with that in mind, I'll start taking the thing apart. Something through the fork of the rewind. That should just spin off. Well, that's an unusual one. Some of these Retina 2As and 1As, they didn't run the thread through this section. That's just cleared out. It means that the rewind will come together, come to bits. There's no thread. There's no thread in this section. Normally the rewind knob will stay together. And the advance. Just swing the lever out about 90 degrees. Take that screw out and lift off the advance lever. The top cover, one screw at each end. This camera is a particularly pretty example of the 2A. Which is interesting, and it might suggest that that problem has been long-standing. Lift the top cover away. Here's our film advance mechanism there. I'll put the lever back on the top. We'll see if we can see what's happening or not happening. Whoops, that probably just pushed that shaft down. Alright, so what have we got here? The cocking action works fine. And as if I spin the sprocket shaft on the inside of the camera, I'm looking to see what other parts also spin. Nothing's moving at this end. So whatever's broken or disconnected is under here somewhere, and we're going to have to dig deeper. So back off with the advance lever. At this stage, I know it's going to be more convenient for me to have the shutter out of the camera, because that's going to make it easier to deal with getting the timing of the cocking rack back correctly afterwards. Basically what I like to do is get the film advance working correctly first, then put the shutter back in and time it to the body. Trying to sort out the cocking action and get the timing of the film advance all correct here, all at the same time, well, that's a path to madness and death, really. can be done, but it's awkward. I'll take that shutter off. Let's have a look at this up here. We take off the release button and its return spring. We can take out the shutter release. Now there may be a spacer down in here on that shaft. I'm looking down there to see if I see one, and I don't. So I'll lift out the shutter release complete. I don't think I need to remove the rangefinder. I could, but I don't think there's a need. Take the spacer off. Let's move that gear up. Here we've got 3 screws. Hold this in place. One here, one down under here. This one, and this one we're after. I'll get that cocking rack out, I think. Slide that back out of the way. It won't come out completely because I've got the rangefinder in the way, but it does expose the screw here. Let's unwind that. It's not under tension. That screw certainly wasn't over tight, or at all really. That one's normal. I'll just untension that spring. So that it's not going to ping away. Some of these parts, I don't have spares, because over the years all the spares I had available have been used up. And the one down at this end. We can lift this away. Now the fault could lie there, but I don't think it does. No. I'll zoom you in. This little gear set here, there's 2 pinions, one below and one above. Now they're supposed to be riveted together. I'll put a mark across that shaft so you can see what's happening or not happening. In fact, we'll take this little anti-backup pawl out of here so you can see, and that will just strip everything away. And with the aid of a pen, I'll make a little mark on there. Let's just run a pen across here, halfway across that gear. Now I'll hold the top from moving by putting this little drive gear back on there and engaging it. I'll hold this firmly and I'll spin the sprocket. You'll see that that shaft and the gear are rotating. That ain't right. They're supposed to be riveted together. So, our problem is with this component. Now I notice that none of the screws here are overly tight. So I wonder what's happened to this camera in the last 4 years. Here's our piece. These two little gears are supposed to be coupled together. As you can see, they're not. Choice at this stage. If this was your camera and you were working on it and you wanted to sort out this problem, I would put this on a vise and I would use a pin punch to whack 3 little divots in here, and that would rivet that thing together. It'll probably never ever fail. But I've probably got a replacement for one of these, and if I have, we'll put that on the camera instead. Well, it looks like I do have a replacement. In fact, a choice of replacements. All of these look to be used, except possibly that one. That's certainly the newest looking of the lot. It's not clean. I think I'll run that through the ultrasonic cleaner and get that gleaming. But this is the piece we want, and the reason we want it is these two gears are coupled together on a common shaft and they're riveted firmly. Let's pop these others away. Clean up this one, ready to put it on the camera. Alright, so I'll apply some grease to these two gear sets. Just put a blob on there, force it in with your thumb, and the hydraulic pressure will deal with the rest. I'll give it a wipe through the centre. And that can go on the camera. We should be done in 5 minutes. Okay, piece by piece. Just choosing the appropriate weapons. This was a very unusual failure on one of these cameras. I don't recall striking that exact problem ever before. Just check that everything moves nicely. That all looks good. Get rid of that piece of hair, we don't want that. Little gear goes on there. That's driven through a dog clutch from the Film Advance, and basically it couples to this little pinion which drives the clutch inside the spool, and it drives this little pinion which is coupled to the pinion below it, which drives the take up there, the sprocket shaft. Check I have those 3 screws tight. Now I noticed a couple of other loose screws on this camera, which is unusual and unexpected, and not sure what's going on there. I have seen odd cases of things loose on cameras where they shouldn't have been. One memorable occasion, somebody had been on a motorcycling holiday and the camera travelled in the pannier bags, and it basically just rattled to pieces in almost no time at all. You don't see that sort of thing very often. Alright, where's our little ratchet? The anti-backup pawl. with its related spring. I'll hook that spring into position. And you can see that that pawl acts to prevent this piece from being able to go backwards. What do we want to put on next? Let's put this together. Put its spring in position. A shutter release button. Now there are two springs here, look very much the same. One will go down inside this tube for our release button, the other one will not. The one that goes down inside the tube goes there. The other one, which is typically shorter, drops down here. That's the return for this piece. This piece goes on. Now I do have a favourite position for that, but I can't quite remember what it is. That would give me half a turn, and we probably don't want that much. Just working out how much advance I want on that tension for when I've got the film advance going. I think that'll do nicely. Alright, with that in position, the cocking rack and this set go on top. Normally I'd be doing this with the rangefinder off the camera, because there's no especially good reason to be doing it with the rangefinder present. Normally if I was servicing a camera, I would start with the empty body and be assembling the film advance mechanism to it. And that screw down loosely. Check that everything's okay. The other plain screw goes at this end. Now the screw that goes here is longer, it's a shoulder screw, and it holds the return spring. Which I don't want falling down that hole, like it just did. Let me retrieve that. There it is. I'm sort of doing this back to front because I'm doing it for the camera rather than for my benefit. That spring goes there, and all my tools are magnetised. The shoulder screw goes on there, and the spring must be free to rotate around the shoulder of the screw like that. With those three screws in position, I can tighten the three screws up if I depress this, I can swing my spring up over the top of it and in behind it, so that now this is sprung loaded to keep it in contact with the cam here. Now I think I want to wind my tension on there next. I'm really struggling because I've got the rangefinder in there, it just makes this awkward. I might remove it, then I can be using my normal workflow. You can work around the rangefinder, but it's awkward. It's awkward, you can't do what you want to do. And what I want to do is quite simple. I want to take the cocking rack out so I can get my film advance working and then put the cocking rack in place. That gear goes on there. That spacer goes on the top. Now I want to wind one full turn of tension on this thing basically. What have we got here? Something's not happening. Oh yeah, thing's out of place, alright. That would seem to be about right to me. Just swing that out half a turn, or quarter of a turn really. Slide in the cocking rack. Let it connect. And I'm looking at the amount of rack that's sticking out at the end here. I need to come in one more knot, one click. That's it. You can just see the end of the cocking rack here, and you've probably got about 1.5 millimeters of that sticking out. That's with this background hard at the stop. That's correct. I'm just going to swing that around 90 degrees. Our cocking rack is now timed correctly, and we can assemble the rest of this mechanism. Right, what do I want to do here? Okay, let's put the shutter release back in place. That's okay. The frame counter, the release button we can put back on at the last minute, so to speak. I'll reassemble my film advance knob. It's not seating. Right, you can hear the mechanism seat. Always make sure you rotate that clockwise. If you try going back the wrong way, you will break that frame counter spring. This is an early 2A. The early 2As had a different mechanism here, and basically the frame counter came up against the top cover. The pin on the range for the frame counter came up against the top cover. On later cameras there was a post that came up off here, coming up through the case at this point, and that did the frame counter. But that frame counter will work, I'm quite confident of that. Alright, well, I'm just going to put the rangefinder back on this camera, and then I'll close it up because there's nothing more exciting to see. And once it's all done, I'll demonstrate how that shutter, the film advance, works correctly now. So here we are, all back together, all working correctly. What's the film advance like now? Well, you'll see that without the rewind button pressed in, you cannot push that sprocket shaft backwards. It's all firmly fixed now. This is absolutely driven by the film advance shaft. The take-up spool will slip. It's got slippage built into it. It's got a clutch. There's no clutch on this. So it was all down to this little component, and these two pinions here on a common shaft. The top one here is simply loose on the shaft. How did it come to get loose? That's one of life's mysteries. We'll probably never know for sure. I think that quite possibly the film might have been forcibly rewound without having pressed in the rewind button. I'm not sure how well that would go. You'd probably end up with an awful lot of film chips as well for your trouble, but that's a possibility. It's certainly not a good look. Are there any other possibilities? Well, one that I have seen before, not that did that damage, but did damage to the sprocket shaft itself and took the teeth off, was where someone had incorrectly loaded a film, so that the film followed the sprocket wheel round, wrapped around here until it had so much film on there that it couldn't move anymore. It was just completely jammed, and extra leverage on the top here was enough to shear the, well, break a teeth on the top of that shaft. But anyway, that wasn't our problem today. Our problem was this thing. And yeah, that's interesting. I don't recall ever seeing one lot. You can see how loose that is. I'm just holding the pinion on the bottom of that shaft, and I can rotate that little pinion on the top on the common shaft, no problem at all. And that's what it was. Well, you always get weird things with cameras. Thanks for watching.